Okay, so tonight I just want to provide a brief update for the board around our work currently going on about our return to school, and really that focus right now on K-1, both our in-person learning model and our remote model. When we think about the educational experience, both of those learning models are extremely important because each student is going to have a kindergarten or a first grade experience in one of those models, and we want both of those to be critically successful. When I think about the messaging that we have made to the community around our planning, and planning doesn't mean we're starting from scratch. Planning means that we are finalizing, that we are figuring out details, because we have done a tremendous amount of planning around both remote, which is being implemented now, and in person, because we were really planning for both over the summer. And so this is a paragraph that I sent out to the community, I believe it was on September 18th, and I just want to point out a few pieces. When we thought about transitioning our early learners back to in-person learning for those families that felt that it was appropriate for their child, it really was a start of a new phase for us, because when we think about that point in time, we made an intentional decision to start the year fully remote and have all students start in their home or neighborhood school placement. And so that means that we didn't divide up all of our students into families that indicated that they would want in-person or families that would indicate that they would want full remote for the entire year. We did that primarily because we wanted to give families a chance to make that decision as close to that decision point as possible. We also know that there was challenges with that decision. Either way, it was difficult for families. We also know that by asking when we did, parents didn't get every last detail about what in-person learning would look like. So we understand that. We understand the nuances of the challenge for families, because they have to figure out, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for our child? What does care look like for when they're not in school, whether in-person or remote? And so we appreciate all that our community has done. I believe last I saw we had about 99% of responses from families, and we're just reaching out to those last few families to document kind of their thinking. And so when we think about what we're approaching, it is the primary responsibility that we are tackling right now is about education layered in with health and safety. There are times when we're thinking about this that it feels like they are in opposition, but we have to figure out how can we marry those two? Because without figuring out how those two pieces come together, we can never have students in person. And so that's a lot of the work we're doing right now as you think about all of the layers of guidance and requirements put on school districts right now to actually implement in person. We have implemented in person for small groups of students. We have about 4 to 5 students at a time with groups of adults for their in-person learning. When you think about then extrapolating that out to group sizes of 12, 14, 16 with 1 or 2 adults, that adds to the complexity. When we also think of just a 5-year-old and what that 5-year-old's life looks like, there's a lot of playing, there's chasing, they touch one another as they're playing, they want to hold hands when they're walking in together. So when we think about what does in-person learning look like, it will be very different, but we also have to figure out, how do we help our youngest learners understand what an in-person model would look like, and we have to be very prepared for those students to be able to come to school. And so when we think about the developmental needs of our students, pairing education and health and safety, it takes a lot of problem solving, and it takes a lot of stakeholders to do that. The commitment we've made as a school district is to very carefully walk through this process with care and attention to details, because we know that if we don't pay attention to each and every detail along the way, that's when we will have an unsuccessful launch of in-person learning. We know that we have the ability to set up our classrooms with the mitigating measures in place to protect our students, our staff, and our community, and that's that effort I'm talking about. And so when I think about each of those stakeholders, our commitment to our students to have a classroom environment that is prepared and ready for them with all of those mitigating measures in place and making it as warm and friendly and caring as possible. When I think about our staff, making sure that we are creating an environment that demonstrates our commitment to their well-being, both physically, health and safety, and their social emotional well-being. And then our community. We are part of the community. We have an impact on the community. And by paying attention to details as we think about our return, it really does either hinder or leads to confidence that our community will have in us. And so as I think about that, it's a number of commitments that we are making to a number of stakeholders to truly do this well. I know just in the recent last week, we've heard two of the larger school districts in Washington state have to pull back from commitments for students to return to in-person learning, able to bring back some of their special needs students, but not able to bring back their general education K-1, 2 students. That's because of all of those details. It is tricky to put all of this in place, and so we are working very hard, paying attention to details to be able to do this work. When we think about how we're doing this work, we have really broken it up into a number of different work groups to really analyze all of the different parts and pieces to this implementation, whether it's school operations, whether it's technology, data, and instructional, our software and hardware program. When we think about our kindergarten students learning, do we want them to keep their device at home, or do we want those devices at school? Do we want them to carry them back and forth? Those are critical decisions that we have to figure out before we move to implementation. And it isn't just as easy as yes or no, or why isn't that already figured out? Because it's truly about the model we have in place. What is the curriculum design that's going to be in place for while students are in person? And if they need them at home, is it really better for that student to have it at home? So those are decisions that have to be made. Facilities, Brian Buck and his team analyzing each one of our classrooms to really understand how can we set classrooms up so that A, they're educationally relevant, but also that they are implementing the required distancing so that our classrooms are implementing those mitigating measures. The K-1 Teaching and Learning Program, Kelly Pease and Jen Rose paying attention to all of those aspects, the different elements of staffing, nutrition, health and safety, and under health and safety, all of those different tentacles that I talked about, evaluating all of the different requirements and guidance that comes to us, and at times changes midstream. When we think about transportation, our model for special education, while pairing that with our model for K-1, how do we, again, marry those two to make sure that we're providing appropriate services for students? When we think about our special education, our English language learners, safety net, and highly capable, we have to analyze and unpack how does an implementation of K-1 affect these programs, and are there changes that we need to make, or do we want to maintain what's currently in place? The social emotional learning aspect of this work. When you think about change, when you think about students potentially needing to shift to a different teacher, that can cause challenges for students. And so we need to pay attention to that. But we also need to pay attention to the adult side of this equation as well. Our staff has put in a tremendous amount of work over the last 6-8 weeks to prepare for students to be successful in remote learning. And they've worked hard, and I know they're pretty tired right now. And so thinking about a shift comes with a heavy social emotional burden as well. We need to pay attention to that. And then when we think about our marginalized communities, our racial equity work, our family engagement work, Gloria Henderson and her team leading that effort to make sure that we are actually applying that equity lens as we do this work. So when we think about some of our K-1 planning, as you know, working through collecting information from staff, making sure that we identify staff who require a remote placement, that's an important part of this. Collecting from students and families, what information or what placement are they seeking? I was just reading this, making sure I had the data right here. But about 40% of our families requested remote learning placement for their kindergarten or first grade students, while 60% of our families requested an in-person learning model. So that helps us really start to plan how many classrooms will be needed for that, how many teachers are needed for remote learning. So we're starting to get the data so that we can start to actualize a number of these pieces and then be able to communicate out what that K-1 model will look like here in the next few weeks. We have to finalize the working conditions for staff. A lot of the pieces that I referenced before, we also have to unpack that around what does the experience and what are the conditions for work for our teachers? Because it's tremendously different than just a typical school year. And so the classrooms are different, the expectations are different, and so we're working through that right now. And then we also have to develop both a remote and in-person learning plan, because it's important that both students receive a high level of support moving forward, because this is their kindergarten and first grade experience. And so it isn't that we just are planning for in-person. We're truly figuring out what's the best remote model for our students and what is the best in-person learning model for our students, all of which takes time and a lot of detail. And that's my presentation around our planning efforts right now, some of the work going on, some of the data. If board members have questions, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
If anyone has any questions, go ahead and jump in. Dr. Carlson?
Yeah, so John, it's not so much a question as an acknowledgement of the reality. With 40% of parents opting to keep kids remote, it's going to be virtually impossible for us to keep every child in class with the same teacher as we transition, because a teacher cannot do two jobs simultaneously, doing the remote teaching and the in-person teaching. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's when parents were making that decision. That was one of the questions that was asked, well, can I be assured that I'll have my same teacher? And really, we couldn't assure that either way, because if a student requests in-person and their teacher requires remote, that would be a change for the student as well. But when we think about what are the values we're going to apply to the process, keeping a student with their current teacher is what's best for that student and that teacher, if at all possible. And so we will work to that end to the greatest degree we can.
Yeah, and we all acknowledge that it's not perfect, but these times are not perfect. No. We're doing our best, so thank you.
Sarah, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so thank you. So just to sort of build on that, so I know the classroom, the other concern that came up was our schools are very strongly community schools, and people, especially K-1, are very strongly tied to their schools. So I know in other districts there's been set up the way that, you have your kindergarten might not be the same teacher, but you are still associated with a teacher from that school and are still connected into that community and PTA. I would hope that that is a parameter that we are going forward with as well, as much as possible.
Yeah, and so we just had that conversation with our elementary principals today, kind of looking at some different models, not as in time in school, but different ways to articulate, full remote, completely disconnected from school, all the way to articulated services for all students in their neighborhood schools. And so when we think about, this is temporary for the majority of students, and we want to maintain connections with families and students to their neighborhood school, their PTSA, because that's really, when we think about ongoing relationships and whatnot, it's their neighborhood. And so But articulating that it also takes time and intentionality. So yes, thank you.
So if I'm summarizing it right, is that yes, that is a parameter and a criteria that will be looked at how you maintain that connect. So if there are 4 first grade teachers and 2 of those could be remote and 2 of those could be doing in person, and then you can split those kids how they would need from there if that's how the numbers fell out within that environment.
I wish it were that clean. It won't be that clean. I've seen the data, and there's naturally going to have to be some shifting. And so, but when I think about students and families maintaining a connection with their school, that's a priority that is important for them moving forward as well. Because if we disconnect them now and then hope to reconnect them in 8 months, that's a tough transition. And so if it's about teacher and student connection, that is something that we are aiming to achieve, but we also know that that's not possible in every last situation. Did I answer your question, Siri?
I was looking more for that black and white of, yes, it's a criteria that we're working towards, that's our goal.
It
or if there was.
It is absolutely a goal. So.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Siri?
I'm sure I can add on later, so go ahead.
Okay. From purely a numbers perspective, I know that we had a staff survey the same time the parent survey went out. Not at a building by building level, but at a basic numbers level. Do we have the same level of enthusiasm for in-person learning?
So we didn't seek level of enthusiasm. Seeking information from our staff was really to ferret out who required remote. And so we were able to do that. We can't say with an assurance that everyone who said yes to in-person said that because they wanted in-person, or that it was really a forced choice for them, but they would prefer remote. Given the numbers, it does look like we're going to need more teachers than require remote to teach remotely. And so I believe that will be a pretty easy transition, because I think there are more staff that would prefer a remote teaching assignment than in person.
So you're looking ahead at hiring additional remote teachers.
So we won't be doing any hiring. It's when you think about 100% of students and 100% of staff, we have more students percent-wise that requested remote than we have staff that require it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's the
That's
best.
a better place to be.
Yeah, it would be worse if it was the other way around.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that might allow, never mind, I jumped out of turn. Go ahead.
It's Mark, I think.
Good evening. When we first announced the survey, the traffic on Facebook and phone calls were heavy on, my God, if they're asking this question, are they planning on doing this next week? My response is we're following, public health rules and so forth. Do we have, at this point, a consideration for a timetable, or does that timetable not start clicking off until after the public health says yes?
So in the communication that goes out to families tonight, I'm saying within the next 2 weeks, we believe we'll be able to communicate the model. And so after the model is communicated, if health data actually levels off, which unfortunately it hasn't over the last week, but if we do see a better set of data from King County Public Health, then we'll be able to identify a date as well. And so I
So
think.
in other words, the parents will have 2 to 3 weeks of making adjustments. Am I correct? From the time that we announce?
Yes, it won't be a week turnaround from announcement to implementation. Because for any
Yeah, their
family.
concern really was trying to make arrangements for kids and so forth.
Yeah, for any family, they're going to have to figure out care and, readjusting schedules and
No,
whatnot.
that was they were concerned about having to turn around on a dime, but that's not the case. And I told them I really couldn't imagine that being the case either, but I wanted to make sure that they heard it tonight. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, thanks. I think Siri had a follow-up
Siri,
question.
let's go back to you you had a follow-up question.
Well, it was it was playing off of if we have less teachers requiring remote to the students and families requesting remote, that does give that capacity potentially to try to recruit those teachers from those schools where you're short to be able to get those kids to be able to stay within a school and a teacher. So it does seem that there's some possibility and flexibility around that could exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the things that as we unpack the student data, we can only have X number of students in a classroom, X meaning 12, or 14, or 16, because of distancing. And that means that if you have 33 students and you can have 16 students in a class, you have to have 3 classrooms. And so that's where the data is really interesting to look at and figure out, because since we've assured people if they make that request that we will honor that, then we have to apply the mitigating measures as well. And so there really isn't room to budge in classroom size.
Right. So no, understand that and that component. The other piece that came with that, and that's from the health safety side, is there a maximum class size that you thought of, as purely through physical distancing that you're considering the space that they're actually in? Knowing, like in childcare, remember you have like a max of 9 with 1 staff member for a whole cohort of 10.
Right.
From my math, it looks like you're looking at a potential cohort of up to 18.
Yeah, so right now, from what I've heard from our support services team, is that the largest number of desks to actually space in a classroom in any of our school sites is 16. And so we actually couldn't go beyond that. And there are schools where we're going to have to do less than that just because of odd sizes of classrooms and whatnot.
Right, and I know the data is not clear in regards to that, but we do know just from a transmission component that the more you limit the overall number, the less likelihood you have things. So that's just something to think about when looking at that. Mm-hmm. Is there a size, even if the classroom could hold 16, should it?
Yeah, I think other considerations are that then kind of drives model as well, because if we want to reduce class sizes below 10, then that would really push us in a direction of like a half-day model or a hybrid model. And when we think about our youngest learners, doing 2 days a week in person, like a hybrid model, probably doesn't provide the level of benefit. So it's kind of weighing all of those things. So
no, absolutely. It just is one of those things of, just because you can put 40 in a room
Yes.
and space them, it doesn't mean we should. So I do think we just need to be thoughtful of what those numbers are.
absolutely.
Cassandra, do you have a follow-up on this same line of inquiry?
Yes, please. I was just going to ask, what's our childcare capacity, both on-site and with our partners right now? Do we have a recent count?
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
Barbara, if you have that at your fingertips, do you want to jump on and provide that?
Yeah, sure. There I am. I don't have an exact count tonight, but it's about 120 through the 3 partners, Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, and Extended Day. The district extended daycare is serving 20 students at 2 sites. So of the 10 sites, most sites are serving 20 to about 35 is the maximum at each site. So, but I
guess,
can get you some specific counts.
Sure. I think I'm looking also for what is the capacity, because I've heard from a few parents that depending on which model we go with for in person, the childcare is going to potentially become a need. And I just wanted to check and see what our capacity is to.
Yeah,
accommodate.
right now, if parents are interested in childcare, we will serve them. And so we can expand to other spaces if needed. So if parents are interested in enrolling, our childcare partners will take their enrollment and then work to, once they outgrow kind of the space they're in, then they work with us to identify new spaces.
And where do parents go? I know there's some information on the website.
Mm-hmm. So if they wish to register, they can communicate with the Boys and Girls Club, depending on the school they're interested in. They communicate with either one of our partners, the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, or Extended Day. And once we have enough families to open another site, then we will do so.
Is this information on the website under anything COVID related, or what?
It's
how do you
both
find
under
it?
fall. It's under fall planning childcare. It's one of the main pages on our website.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Dr. Hallman, I have two questions. The first is, under any of the, well, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Would we adopt a model that would result in some students who wanted to access in-person learning not being able to access in-person learning? Or all the models, do they account for, if there's demand, we will meet that demand to at least some degree?
So it's a great question, and we led with really in-person or remote without really a great description of what in-person would be, given all of the factors we've talked about tonight that we are still working towards. In the parent communication that goes out this evening around the Return to School Task Force update, there's a section in there that just talks about when we determine the model, we will actually allow families to request a change so that we can, if we can accommodate, we will. Because we know there could be a change in circumstances, there could be because of the model, they may want to change either way. And so we just want to give another opportunity for families to indicate that. We're not going to resurvey all families, but just open up for a short window of time as we finalize our plans, allow families to do that. And some of it will be space available at their current site and things like that. But by and large, I believe we'll be able to accommodate.
Okay. Second question is, at the building level for administrators, will our principals and associate principals, will they be responsible with administering both in person and online? Is that something you're playing thought? I know you may not know the answer right now, but is that something we're thinking about as we're thinking about these models?
Yeah. I can't articulate all of it right now. That's part of, as we think about the articulation of all students to their neighborhood school, what responsibility does a neighborhood school principal have? And then what responsibility does our remote academy principal have? And so it's figuring out all of the details of that, just so that it's clear for the staff members and the families' degree of responsibility for different aspects.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry, that wasn't a great question. It's something I was sort of noodling on. Director Bleasner?
Thank you. So to just follow up, because I know our conversation around K1 coming back had always been, or at least from my memory, was around more of a full-time, 4 days back and 1 day remote. Like Wednesday would be remote as it is, and then Monday, Tuesday. So they would come all 4 days. Because I'll be honest, the hybrid model as described to me from my understand, where you would be 2 days in person and 3 days asynchronous, seems problematic in many ways for those who would need in person, and potentially less face time for our K-1 students. So I guess I'm just trying to say, I guess, is there a preferred model at this point? Because my understanding was to come back to the 4 days was the preferred model. And I just want to make sure, am I wrong with that? That would be mine.
I'm probably going to give you an answer that you don't like, only because we led in July with the 4-day-a-week model. And so I would say if we can implement that, that's, I think, the ideal for students, because having more touch points consistently with their teacher, with instruction for literacy and numeracy, for all of those reasons, social development, for all of that, it makes complete sense. We also know we have to analyze the data to be able to finalize that, because whatever we do with K-1 implements what we can do with 2nd through 5th grade. And so it all really has to be thought of collectively. And we already know we can't bring 2nd through 5th grade back in a 4-day-a-week model just because of class sizes. And so we already know that up front. We also know that through our K-3 class size reduction monies, we had to use that for additional safety net teachers, because as a district, we're out of classrooms. And so we do have an opportunity to potentially shift some staff to support K-1. Mike Van Orden and team met with those teachers last week to talk about that, discuss that as an option. So it gives us a small buffer of staffing to be able to have more K-1 teachers than what our staffing, if you will, generates. But we also have to pay attention to classrooms and classroom space if we want our 2 through 5 to be able to have the opportunity for in-person. So I think 4 days a week is the ideal. So, but we are looking at all of those data.
I appreciate your honesty with the challenges that are in place and the fact that there's additional, just knowing the conversation that's been held, I guess, and other board members can chime in as to where sort of their viewpoint is, was that is viewed as sort of a priority and potentially even up to 2nd grade in that component. But so how do you look at that in that regard? And knowing that numbers are shifting and changing, that's a whole nother ballgame too. But yeah. I guess I would throw that out as I just don't want to be surprised, I guess, was my thing, if it came back with a model that I wasn't expecting. And so I don't know if there's other board members who have an opinion one way or another on that.
I would like to see the 4-day-a-week full days if we're bringing K-1 back. It just seems like a lot to expect very young children to be able to handle the 2-day schedule in person.
Any other questions or comments from the board for Dr. Holman on the superintendent report? Director Stewart?
Yeah, I echo what folks are saying. It's the old KISS principle, keep it simple. And I think the simpler the better. There's less confusion. If it's the 4-day, that's fine. Just make it as simple as possible. So there's very little confusion, very little misunderstanding, and there's a thorough understanding of why you're going in that direction and the basis for it. I think that'll help parents, because the comments we keep seeing is we don't see the reasoning behind it. We see the justification leading up to it, but not really the reasoning that's in our children's interest as opposed to the district's interest. So we really need to look at it from those eyes, if you would.
Okay. The next, unless there's any other questions or comments, we'll move to the next item on our agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Holman. The next item on our agenda is board member comments. I will preface this by saying we have, as a board, been meeting for the last, I've lost track of the days, either 1 week or 2 weeks. doing various linkages with different groups from our community. I think it would be beneficial for each board member to share one or two takeaways from those meetings. Does anyone want to go first? Director Sage?
I'll go first. I think I participated in 5 of the linkages, and one of the things that stood out to me, besides the fact that it was an amazing opportunity to speak with parents about what is working, where there are blockage issues or hang-ups, what is not going well, and actually here's some of the positives that were going well. That was refreshing. But also to hear, some of the really good ideas, such as when we met with one of our Spanish-speaking community groups, they described when you have a translator, but the translator doesn't necessarily know what these academic terms are or what it means, it can get lost in the translation. I imagine it would be like trying to explain medical terms when you're translating for a family at a hospital, and some things just don't connect very well. So looking at translators who actually have some context around the situations was one of the suggestions. Another suggestion was, different ways of engaging a certain group of parents, engaging their children. For instance, our special education PTSA gave some suggestions on, if my child can only sit here for 3 minutes at a time, here are the things that I do. What are the things that teachers could do to help keep them engaged online? So I found the linkages to be highly beneficial.
Director Bleasner?
Yeah, and I would second what Cassandra has said, that absolutely they were very beneficial. I had the opportunity to be in 4 of them. I think probably one of the key things I kept hearing was urgency, was the sense of this has been slow in coming, especially in addressing some of the inclusion and racial equity issues within the district. That the timeline was appreciated, but potentially even that timeline seemed a bit slower than what it should be. So is there things we can do now in which to go forward? I think the other piece that was interesting that came out was in regards to what made somebody feel a part of or be welcomed or included. And it was interesting. Sports definitely came up as an option of just a place where they were who they were, as well as clubs came up. And you heard this both from parents and students. It was on both sides. And I'm concerned that in this remote learning environment, how well are we succeeding at making sure that those additional pieces are getting built in? We didn't have the opportunity to discuss that any further, but that was another piece that I think there's things we can learn from remote, both good and bad. What's worked well. There's actually an interesting piece that from special needs side that potentially that inclusion felt a little easier through a remote learning environment because it was a more level playing field in a different way. So it's a very interesting way of there might be things to learn from each of these environments and pull out the good things. But urgency is probably what, and actually I think the teens actually said it best. Why aren't we talking about this in our schools? So there was concern that there's been a huge upheaval with the social justice and the work with Black Lives Matter and that, but they're not feeling we're holding any of those conversations necessarily within their peer groups at school. So there was some question on that, which I thought was an important point to bring forward.
Director Stewart?
Go ahead.
And Chris, you can go next.
Yeah, all right. I was
Mark, you're on
going to say.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go
Trying
on, Mark. There you go.
couldn't quite hear you. Okay. I had one of the groups that I was in was on the equity, and one of the very interesting aspects of the session was virtually all the participants that were not senior staff or board members were teachers, and they felt that there hadn't been enough planning time, or not planning time, I'm sorry, continuing education time to help train the teachers in these issues. They felt that it was usually tacked on maybe 15 minutes, half an hour into a half-day meeting or whatever. They were feeling like that their colleagues were not getting the immersion in the issue that they needed to have in order to effectively come out with a better sense of perspective on equity. And so I'm thinking that is something to take back, that we need to, as we look at our training sessions, that in order to be taken seriously by any of our teachers of color, that we need to be able to demonstrate that is an important aspect of any training sessions that we have, and it's not to feel like a tack on, if you will. That's it.
Dr. Carlson?
So the sessions I was in were they were all with the African American community or Hispanic community, and it's I'll be honest, it was heartbreaking to hear from these communities the level of frustration, legitimate frustration, with the lack of progress. It was heartbreaking to hear the lack of confidence that we're listening to them. I think that after we had talked to them, many of them felt a little better. But, words matter not. Actions are what matter. So from here on out, that's what we're going to have to do. It broke my heart in so many ways to hear people who honestly believe that we on the board, for whatever reason, that we don't believe that Black Lives Matter. And I tried to reassure them that indeed that is a universal thing. Black lives do matter. Brown lives matter. This is something where we want to help these communities who've been socially marginalized for far too long. And so the community wants to engage, but they're so frustrated and so tired, and exhausted is a word that I heard multiple times, that we really need to continue putting more of our energy into it than asking them to put their energy into it, using their energies as wisely and as carefully as we can so that we can conserve. They're not an infinite resource. As one of them put it, I can't teach all of the white people. And let's face it, there are a lot of white people in this district. So it's something that for me, it was uncomfortable, it was painful, and I know that it's nothing compared to what this community's been dealing with forever. So we can do a lot, but we need to do a lot, and we need to do it, as Siri pointed out, urgency is definitely part of things that are there. Support for our teachers of color is something that's critical. Support for our students of color. These are things where we have to be creative about finding a way to provide that support even before we can get some of the systemic things. I mean, changing hiring practices or improving the fraction of faculty of color, that's a decade-long process. How do we make sure that our students of color feel more supported before we get there? So this was something that I came away with it with the feeling that this is an even bigger challenge than I had given it credit for. And I didn't think it was going to be easy in the first place. So it was also incredibly worthwhile. I mean, it didn't make me feel good, but it made me feel like we can do good here. That's it.
Mark, your hand's still raised. Is that from before? Or did you have something else you want to add?
No, I had a little bit to add to two things. One of the other sessions I attended was for the LGBTQI students, and the angst that they felt. And it was actually a student group, if you will, from Juanita High, as I recall. And the angst that they had about not being able to find a counselor that actually understood their needs and the situations that they were in. More often than not, they went to the sponsors of their student group because they felt they were very in tune with them, but they said their counselors were clueless. And for a child in school that's going through, to be quite frank, high school is hard enough, but going through the difficulties that those students are going through, they can't walk into a door that has closed ears or that has untrained ears. I think it was more untrained than it was the fact that they didn't want to listen. It was just they didn't know how to or how to respond. The one thing that I took away from all of this was this can't be a one-time stop. This has to be continuous, and it has to. These conversations have to continue, whether they break into having one-on-ones with some of these folks, or whether again it's more of these sessions. But we don't want to have it appear that, okay, we've done one, that's it, we're finished, we'll come back next semester because we already heard from you folks one time. No, this has got to be an ongoing dialogue, and I'm not sure we really reached the dialogue stage as much as we hit the interrogation or the questioning stage. And it's when we get to dialogue that we'll have it better. I'm sorry, Eric, I'm finished.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have any other comments on this topic, feedback?
Were you gonna weigh in anything additional, Eric?
I am. I was
Okay,
just giving
I think I'll
everyone-
wait and go after you then.
Okay. I have a few, I think, disjointed notes or thoughts. First, it was illuminating for me in these sessions to hear that when people were talking about equity and thinking about it and how it impacts their lives, the prism through which almost everyone was thinking and talking about it through was through race. And I was gonna say we as a board, but maybe I should just use I statements. I have, as a board member, have I think not been as much as focused on that, if I'm being honest, and I've been more focused on thinking about equity in terms of income, so that was really, it was helpful for me to hear that and to have those thoughtful conversations on that. The other thing I have some really scribbled note. I don't know, I just can't see that. The word that I wrote down on a lot of these was trust. That I kept hearing over and over, and and that's a real interest that I found that people had was just wanting to feel like they could trust the system to work for them, and a lot don't feel that way right now. So if we're thinking about what are our policies trying to achieve, I really do think, for me at least right now, that was a big component of what I heard. I think I have one other thought, but fortunately I've lost it for now. Okay, so that's it. I think that they've been wonderful sessions, and I've really appreciated all the work that went into putting them together and then also facilitating them. Our staff is a skill I didn't even know that a lot of people had, was facilitating these things. It was really incredible. Creating an environment where people can have these really vulnerable conversations is pretty impressive. So, okay. Any other board member comments for tonight? I think Director Sage, sounds like you do.
Yeah, I would just like to ask Dr. Holman if we could have an update on the work that Gloria and Kelly and Shannon are doing as far as preparing for in-person. I'm sure there's a lot of how do we create the safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment for our BIPOC students headed back to school and our marginalized students. And I wondered if we can get an update on how that particular work is going, since K1 will be going back, it sounds like, the soonest.
Yeah, let me connect with Associate Superintendent Matt Gillingham, because his whole division really focuses their efforts on that work, articulating that to the organization. So I'll connect with him and we'll figure out the best venue to provide that update to the board.
Thank you.
Director Blazner? You're on mute.
You gotta love that. Love technology. To just follow up on the public comment from the individual who spoke about technology and the challenges with those machines and things. So one of the pieces that would be great, I know that we were supposed to be getting that in regards to what is our percentage of kids who are engaging, how are we addressing those pieces? I guess my curiosity at some point is to get some ideas. Where's our feedback loop to be able to address those pieces? That's the piece I'm not aware of. So even if we could direct community to those as well, so this information can come in. So I guess that's my question. For future.
Yep.
Not necessarily tonight.
Absolutely.
But sooner rather than later, just because it is sort of a key component.
You'll see something on Thursday.
Director Carl?
Thank you.
I just wanted to make sure that we said thank you to all participants in our outreach this last week. Their participation was invaluable, and their honesty was tremendous. It was incredibly valuable for me at least. So.
Director Stewart?
Yeah, on the technology, this evening's public comment kind of hit home with a lot of the comments that I've been seeing, especially during the early stages of our remote learning this semester. The technological problems have driven a lot of the students to do just what that parent had said she was doing or had to do, and that was go to a store and get a new piece of equipment. And that exacerbates our divide between the haves and have-nots. I mean, I've seen pictures on Facebook of families where their student looked like they were sitting at NASA Control Center. And then you had other kids that had the laptop that was issued to them that was 4 or 5 years old. I wouldn't know an older laptop from a new one, to be quite frank, other than the fact that it was perhaps aged a little bit. But these kids, they recognize it. And there are some parents who are questioning whether or not it was because they were in a Title I school. And if that's the case, shame on us. I don't think it was intentionally that way at all. I have full confidence in our staff that, to be quite frank, that when we went out and started looking for these laptops at the time, we had to scramble to start the learning process. There weren't many out there to be found, and I appreciate that. But now that we're starting to get into that deeper into the semester, where perhaps there's more capacity in the retailers and in the suppliers, we need to go back and try and update these computers.
Okay. Oops. Any other board comment tonight?
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, Director Blazner.
So John, I'm just hoping that in whatever information comes through with technology, the instrument itself is one piece. My piece of concern is truly the engaging and kids being able to get through and what's that level of frustration and being able to utilize it. So I do think that's the component. And that's harder to get to, honestly. It's easier to say the number of computers, but I think I'm looking to quality of the engagement, if that makes sense.
Sorry, I have to turn my mic on this end too before I say yes. Part of the data that you'll see is around connection and things like that. We were just talking in cabinet today about really what is that next phase of reaching out to staff, families, students around experience. So then we can start, identifying what's low-hanging fruit that we can tackle right now, what's some bigger things that maybe we didn't know about that we can start addressing, because, the longer students are in remote learning, the more probably quality data set we could have around experience, and we want to make sure it's quality for kids. So, yep.
So great. Thanks.
So,
So knowing we're in this for a longer period of time is worth being able to do those feedback loops as much as possible to improve it. So thank you.
Director Stewart?
Yes, piggyback on what Director Bleasner was saying, I hope that we'll be able to use those pages upon pages or screens upon screens of Facebook feedback that I passed on to the board and to staff. I think a lot of those detail the agony that a lot of these students were going through and the frustration and anger that parents were going through. I'm so glad that we have so many parents that can afford to go out and buy 2 or 3 more laptops to make them feel like they've got control over their destiny. But I really felt sorry for the kids. I mean, having come from one of the lower income families in my school district growing up, I could feel for those kids that had one piece of equipment and it wasn't connecting and they couldn't get in, and all they see is their future flashing before their eyes. So I'd hope we'd go back and look at some of those comments and perhaps have an outreach to some of those parents to see, has it gotten any better for your student? If it hasn't, what hasn't gotten better? Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? We're we don't
One
really
quick
have a
thing.
schedule. We're fine.
One
Yeah, go ahead,
thing.
Director Sage. Yeah.
We had a particularly amazing class this morning. There are some incredible things happening. Teachers are working their tails off to keep kids engaged. And I just wondered if there was a place that we could sort of showcase some of the efforts that they're going to for our students. I know it's a video that this particular teacher had saved, but we need to shine a light on our staff who are really pulling ideas out of hats and creating this, more engaging environment for kids.
Director Bleasner, your mic's not muted. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
It was a piece and just having conversation with some other board members, and it was around visits through the online setting. Is there a way to do site visits of some kind?
Right.
To be able to see it in action, actually, to a certain extent. And I know that's something we've talked about, but we don't really have any of that set. So I just wanted to sort of put that out.
So let me talk with the team to figure out the best way to do that. Identify teachers that also have a comfort level right now in the space, because I know there's many of them that, they feel like each and every class feels really, really new still. But there are some teachers, like Director Sage was talking about, it's a very natural environment for them. So yeah, let me work with the team and either this week or next week put something out to the board on Thursday to indicate, options, opportunities, things like that.
That'd be great. Cool, thanks.
Okay, the next scheduled board meeting, following tonight's board meeting, the board will be meeting in study session, and the topics to be discussed are professional learning around the development of our equity policy and the 2020-2021 budget. And then our next scheduled board meeting will be held on October 26th. Now, Dr. Holman, has the Open Public Meetings Act waiver been extended through the end of the month? Do we know that?
So last I looked, it was pending extension. I didn't check today to see if it had formally been extended.
Okay, well, my expectation is that it will be. So for those listening at home, my expectation is the board will meet at the same time as we did this week at 5 p.m. with a study session to follow. Okay, we've now reached the end of our agenda. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the October 5 board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Director Carlson and seconded by Director Sage that we adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
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 Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Okay, it is 6:23. How about 6:35 we start our study session? Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. And for board members, there's a new Teams link to launch that. And for those watching at home online, there's another link you need to click on to launch that meeting. I think I have that correct. On the same webpage, there's another link, I believe, to launch the study session. So, okay, I will see everyone at 6:35.